my passion project is really what I'm doing with Reality Capture Network, because to me, it's really that transition point of taking the knowledge I had gained early on and using laser scanners and drones and point cloud data and models, and now trying to take some of the lessons learned and bring it over and help people who maybe are just starting out, because I see so much benefit in sharing our failures, sharing lessons learned. That's my favorite.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0. Today I'm speaking with Matthew Byrd, founder, CEO at Reality Capture Network. Matthew, thanks for chatting with me today.
Pleasure being here. Thanks for having me.
So your background, visionary, entrepreneur, advisor, speaker, business owner. What's your favorite role?
Oh man, it is fun having a career that's kind of growing from, different angles, from like media side and education and advising companies to, really where my background came from, which is hands-on surveying and laser scanning and drones. My absolute favorite thing is just helping people. And both of those do that, but my passion project is really what I'm doing with Reality Capture Network, because to me, it's really that transition point of taking the knowledge I had gained early on and using laser scanners and drones and point cloud data and models, and now trying to take some of the lessons learned and bring it over and help people who maybe are just starting out, because I see so much benefit in sharing our failures, sharing lessons learned. That's my favorite.
So, growing up, you often hear folks say, they want to be an architect or an engineer, a doctor, lawyer, et cetera. It's not too often folks say, I want to be in the reality capture space. So,
yep.
How'd you land there?
Great question. Growing up, I had no idea that reality capture was a space. I mean, I guess when I was younger, it wasn't a space yet. What I wanted to do when I grew up, when I was younger, was I wanted to be an athlete. I loved sports. That was my life. I could tell a whole story about that, but my opportunity to do that ended through a very bad car accident. I couldn't play sports anymore out of high school, and I transitioned to music. Absolutely loved music. Would have pursued that. Really hard to make a career out of music. I fell into this industry because my father was a land surveyor, and after sports and music kind of seemed like non-option, I just fell into surveying. And to be honest, early on in my career, it was not really an exciting role. Like, I was 18, 19, I was younger. Traditional survey at that time was not exciting to me as a young person. I was traveling on a crew, working out in the heat, pounding nails in the ground. It was around 2009, 2010, when we got introduced to laser scanning. That is what changed my mind about the future. I got really excited about it. It was very visual. It was immersive. That is what changed my career.
So, walk me through that. So that turning point from land surveying to laser scanning, there was a turning point. What was it about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Going deeper into what I just mentioned, right? Like, traditional survey to me as a young person, it was not that exciting. You're out taking single shots. You come back and you got these random points in CAD and you're drawing individual lines. The only reason I was in it was because I could get into it. My father was in it. It was an easy job for me. I didn't go to college. I had no other career path defined. Laser scanning, it took that love of, gamification of very visual technology, going out and scanning something and bringing it back and seeing the digital replica. That just got me really excited. Being a young person in the survey firm I was at, I got put in charge of looking into that. We had someone come in and give us a demo on a scanner, and they're like, okay, we definitely see that this could get integrated into survey. Matt, why don't you be the guy to test it and trial it and figure it out? And so being given some freedom, some responsibility, as well as now this new technology that no one else was really doing around us, it really lit this fire to me of I can love doing this. This is fun. It's visual. It's very futuristic. So it took that excitement and put it into my job, where before I was not, like I said, I was not super excited. I didn't want to go to work the next day. I didn't want to work extra hours. When the technology entered into my hands, that was I was the one who went home and started researching stuff, and I was looking up how to do things. And I wanted to play with the scanner on the weekend and go scan this cool building and see the data. And that, over the next several years just transformed to I got a bigger job offer. I got hired by a corporate company. I grew into these like dream jobs. I got so excited. I ended up quitting my dream job to start my own business. And that starts the whole entrepreneurship journey. But the technologies, I lived what I talk about now, in that the technologies can transform old ways of working. It can inspire the next generation to want a job in the built environment.
So many paths here to go into, from the business side to the technical side. Just maybe for a moment, stay on the technical side. So for the average non-technical person, why does laser scanning matter?
That is a great question. And that could be a whole podcast in and of itself, because it can go 100 directions. But overall, when we talk about the built environment, we'll use just construction projects as a use case, right?
Right.
Every industry, whether it is a warehouse that holds product, whether it's an airport, whether it's an office building, every industry goes through construction projects. They go through renovating a space, they extend a space, they revamp a space. All of those industries need information about what exists today in order to efficiently design and expand and create drawings and go through construction process. And one overall problem is that there is no accurate information of what exists now. There's old drawings that are inaccurate. There's old design drawings that aren't how it was actually built. Laser scanning in and of itself goes out and accurately maps out any type of environment and brings it back into a digital format that a building owner can use, a GC can use, an architect, an engineer, an electrical, a surveyor, every trade can use the information that laser scanning gathers. So just in construction, that's one reason. And that's just construction. Then you go into entertainment and you go into forensics and there are so many uses across so many industries. That's what got me really excited about the technology as well, is I started getting pulled into types of projects and industries I'd never imagined before. I didn't know I was going to be on movie sets behind scenes and on forensic sites mapping, casualties. And as soon as that started happening and these requests started expanding what we were asked to do, that's also when I started realizing this technology is way more powerful than just a tool to a surveyor. And I think, to be honest, we've barely scratched the surface of where it's going to be integrated and how much it's going to be used.
Right. The solution seems obvious. Like, we need better information, we need more accurate information. From your experience, what might be some of the limiting factors? And is it availability? Is it the skill set? Is it just the cost of it? Why doesn't every building, 3D scan their space?
Great question. My initial thought, just based on what I've seen over the years, the very first thing I think is lack of education, lack of awareness. Historically, if you just call up 10 different people and ask them if they're familiar with laser scanning, they have no idea what it is. So number one is just the education on what are the tools, how can they be used, what is it benefiting, what is it replacing, how do you use the data? I believe education, which is why I'm like, I started a podcast. I started a conference. My whole goal around education is just to give awareness to what's even possible. To be honest, I think that is the number one reason. Because then if you even try to dial back and say cost, I love approaching that too. We've done comparisons of individual jobs where we've had a building, a GC on a project that was going through a renovation of a 10-story building, say we didn't budget to do scanning. Well, okay, what are you doing if you don't scan? Well, we're going to do what we always do. We're going to send out a whole team of people with tape measures and notepads and pencils. And it's like, okay, the cost is coming from somewhere and it's going somewhere. It's not the cost to scan. It's that you're not yet familiar with what it replaces and what the benefits are. And I would still say there are some other factors, right? Like not every business can go out and buy a $100,000 laser scanner. Well, did they know there's a $10,000 option? Did they know if they're just doing individual rooms, they could use an iPhone? Like that comes down to the education of even what tools exist. How do they work? What are the budgets? What are the limitations? So there's like the industry application education, and then there's the technical, education of devices and processes and workflows. So I think education is number one. Obviously, there's still a few other factors of cost and things. I'll also say, though, that I think over the next few years, as the education keeps happening, we see more of that happening. We see more people becoming aware. I believe that there will be way more demand for it than there are technical users and implementers and skilled labor, because you're not, there's not really college graduates coming out with laser scanning expertise, right? We see the demand growing that even universities are starting to plug in little pieces of it. You might know what a laser scanner is because you were in a construction management class or a BIM degree or something. But even then, nobody's really training the workforce that will be needed for the future of these.
You've had a chance to work with some fairly big companies. So I want to role play with you for a second. So I'm an owner operator. I've got a ton of locations across the US. I've got acquisition teams, design and engineering teams. I've got facilities management teams. We own 1,000 warehouses across the US and Canada. I've heard that this scanning thing could help. How do I even think through how to even start to hire, like what dots do I need to start connecting? What do I need to start considering?
That is a challenge, because to implement these technologies on a single project in some city, pretty easy. There is somebody who can help you. One of the biggest problems from that you just threw out of a large company that has thousands of locations is because these technologies are new enough and there's no organized body, there's no standards and there's no certifications, there's no license requirement. There are so many different types of technologies. There are so many different people that perform work in different industries, different accuracy requirements, different knowledge levels, that to accomplish what you just determined, it is a challenge. Because if you hire two different people in two different cities to capture two different warehouses, you're very likely going to get two different results because you don't know what gear they're using. So as the asset owner, they need to get deep understanding of the tools, the technology, maybe consulting from someone who does know those and help them break down, like, okay, what types of assets you have. You have a warehouse. Okay, we as the owner need to build out a plan and a process of what type of accuracy are we looking for? How do we vet the service providers or people that we want to hire to come in and do the work? We need to vet that process. What tools should be used? What format do we need that data delivered in order to use it within our projects? There are a lot of steps in order to handle a mass volume of projects like that. That is one of the challenges that I see in that scenario.
Yeah. When an owner operator does approach you with kind of a similar kind of engagement, what's maybe some of the most misunderstood aspects of like what you do, or like what they're coming in like assuming?
Good question. It's harder than most people expect, I think. When you look at an entire process, you take 1 million square foot warehouse. You talked about an asset owner that has thousands of warehouses. So let's take 1 million square feet. How long is it going to take to capture that? What work goes in that to get it accurate enough to use for the construction projects we're looking at? As soon as you're done capturing it, is it ready for me to take in as a model now? How long does it take to model it? How much detail do we need in the model? There's a lot of misconceptions, assumptions made along that whole ecosystem and path that are a lot more difficult and you need more attention to than most people think. If someone is not really familiar with like the BIM process, the model process, the laser scanning process, their assumption would be, okay, if you go out and scan my building tomorrow, then you can pass over all the files the next day, right? Like it'll be done. So I think education of what that whole string of events looks like.
And you began alluding to this, but what you're suggesting is that one challenge is just the technical challenge. Another is like quite literally like the business of making this happen across one location or at scale. I mean, when you started your business, I have to imagine, even dating back to 2009 when you started with your father to now, things have changed. How can folks think about the business of capture? The differences between perhaps, you have on the one hand, completely customizable services. On the other hand, somehow productizing a service where maybe the owner has some kind of pre-selected versions of the services. Help me understand, like, how do you think through the business of capture?
Great question. I think we'd have to dig into the detail of who it was, what their use case is. The biggest problem, again, I think, is that the technology can be used in so many different ways that the workflow and the work that goes into it and the deliverable that is provided is very, very different if you're an oil and gas facility or a refinery than it is if it's a renovation of a retail store, than it is if it's a high-rise building, if it's a large parking structure. I believe that certain industries or certain company types could definitely turn it into a more easy plug and play option. The biggest thing is that each of those different use cases or industries or client types need to have their own understanding, their own guidelines, exactly what they need. I don't know if that completely answers your question, but I think that it's just that deep dive per application.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, what you're suggesting is like the market is so massive with so many different verticals, to your point about oil and gas versus retail versus that there's a world where, like you mentioned, where there's more demand than what can actually be supplied. Like
Yep.
any single vertical,
Yeah.
right? Just servicing any single vertical could be pretty massive.
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I know entire businesses that all they do is visual effects, entertainment, commercials, movie sets. Like that's all they do because it's a very specialized process of, well, how do we need to capture it for that? How long do we have to capture it? What kind of budget are those types of jobs? What the process to take a point cloud and filter and clean and mesh and put it in a format that needs to be used for visual effects. If you know how to do that, it doesn't mean you know how to do a model for an airport or for an architect. Like those workflows, the software is required, the knowledge required, the technical skill set is completely different from visual effects to a building. And same to, again, a facility that has piping and flanges and tanks and valves, whether that be chemical or nuclear or, food processing. That is very different than somebody who knows how to do a architectural model of a office space. So you could get very special. And that's what I also recommend. Like I didn't do that. I didn't pick one vertical in what I became specialized in of like, hey, I only laser scan in buildings. Because when I started, it felt like there were not a lot of people at that point doing scanning. So I was excited every time I got pulled into a new industry and a new challenge. And because ultimately, I care about helping people solve the problem, right? So if I get called and they're like, look, we know that you know how to do scanning and maybe you work in buildings, but I've got this failing building and we need to do this analysis of it. I'm like, I don't know anything about construction defects and I'm not an expert in structural, but if I can provide the data to that structural engineer to do the analysis they need and they think this data is going to be helpful, I want to try that. But again, what I recommend for companies is pick an area of expertise or use it within your own type of projects and go very deep into it because there's so much that can be done with the data. If you become a specialist, that's very valuable. If you stay diverse, you can still do a lot of things, but it's hard to be an expert at everything.
Yeah. Yeah. To stay on this for a second, the hardware technology itself. So when you started around 2009, I believe you mentioned laser scanning took off. I'm an owner. I hear a lot of acronyms and big words like LiDAR and photogrammetry and SLAM. And like, I don't got time to understand nuances and like how can perhaps the average non-technical real estate professional think about all of the different technologies that even dating back to 2009 to today, 15 years later, what do I need to know about these different technologies?
That is part of the challenge. I see that owners often ask, right? They say, okay, we don't know anything about the tools, the technology like you're asking, but we know that it's valuable and we want you to come scan our building. Well, how do you even ask for the service other than just say, we need a building scanned? But if you don't take the time to learn a little bit about the differences or find somebody who knows the difference and have them come in and help you build out, again, what workflow is best or required for your type of project. The problem with not knowing is that I see people put out a proposal request and say, hey, we need this scanned. And they get 4 different bids, right? And they are $5,000, $20,000, $80,000. And it's like, okay, if you're not specific enough, you're going to get very different quotes that are going to produce very different results. And what happens in that scenario? Often they're like, well, cheapest bid wins. Then they get data that is not accurate, that's not good enough for what they needed. Now they don't believe in the technology and they think it's not good enough. So again, that goes back to why I think education is so important. So from the owner perspective, they need to find somebody who can help guide that process of, you don't have to know every tool, but make sure that whatever it is that you're going to at least ask for is proper. Go detailed enough to understand what it is that's going to be done, what you're getting delivered. And then it's our job, right? As the people doing the service or doing the laser scanning, It's our job to understand and educate ourselves enough to know and make sure we know how accurate it is, our workflows in order to get that data proper. So that's why I think both sides need to be educated. Because I'll go the other direction. You mentioned the owner and what do they need to know? Well, what about the companies that are saying, I want to start doing laser scanning? And they run out and buy the first thing that they're sold. Hey, this one's cheap enough. It's a camera. It takes a minute. I can go now scan an airport. But now they don't even know they're doing it wrong. So I believe the education for both the user and the owner are critical.
How do we even begin to navigate this? I mean, just to kind of stay even high level right now between some of the emerging tech across photogrammetry and LiDAR and SLAM. I think you had the advantage that, you started as a surveyor. And I think what we've learned is that with laser scanning, making it presumably somewhat more attainable, accessible, what I find is that there's often a tension between kind of the surveying community, right? With kind of like, the good old days, like this is how you do it. And then laser scanning professionals thinking like they're now surveyors.
Yes.
I find this kind of tension.
Totally.
How can we maybe begin to demystify like the kind of different kinds of technologies and generally?
So not at all to plug RCN, but one of the ways we are trying to solve that problem, because I see that problem exists, I don't see someone really helping solve it. Part of how we think we can solve it, we've created committees where people from around different industries that have interest in these technologies are volunteering and joining these committees. It's a very community collaborative event process or pursuit of saying, okay, let's get laser scanning professionals from industrial and architecture and forensics. Let's get all of those laser scanning people together and work on some pilot project stuff together, work on writing some best practices, work on creating some case studies. I believe that part of the way to solve the problem is creating material that can show the differences, that can explain why you would do one thing versus the other. When is survey control needed versus not? When can I use photogrammetry or mobile LiDAR or SLAM or terrestrial? Right now, there's not a lot of material out there to help people know the difference, understand the different workflows. It's everybody has to learn the hard way by themselves. My goal with committees is saying, let's all come together and share the lessons learned and the testing and the outcomes. And now we, as different service providers, can all get the benefit of that. And we can produce material that educates the end owner and the client so I believe it's through collaboration and sharing information that we really start to solve some of that.
What does the future look like? I mean, not to put you in a, I find this question kind of silly because we obviously don't know, but like in 5 years from now, like assuming that we've got better standards, better education, what does the capture process look like?
To be honest, I think it looks like it looks now, but a lot more of it. You look at, again, the different types of scanners, right? There's one that costs $100,000 and you walk around with it. There's $150,000 on a tripod, but then there's also a $12,000 option. There's iPhone LiDAR. I think as we build out some best practices and guidelines and ways to use the different tools and when to use one versus the other, I would use, again, an example of like a construction site, right? They're doing a renovation on this building. Historically, they would go out and scan one time at the beginning now to get an as-built, and then they would move on with construction. I believe more and more projects over the next several years are going to start scanning every day, every month, every week. Like scan at the beginning, scan throughout construction. You're capturing what the current status is. You're comparing it to design. You're catching issues. You're improving safety. You're documenting the process. As the devices are faster and cheaper, and we have so many people focusing on software that can produce better results, better analysis, AI is getting integrated to extract information. All I believe that's going to do is increase the amount of capture that's happening, the data that's being produced. And that's where I say, as of today, I don't think there's enough people focused on these technologies to support what those clients are going to want in the future. For one organization right now who has 1,000 sites, it's very challenging for them to get those captured in a reasonable time frame. Well, guess how many asset owners really have 1,000 or more sites that in the next several years may start wanting this? There is not the workforce to produce that today.
You broached the subject, so I'm going to take it there. AI. Now, everyone across different industries is kind of using it in slightly different ways. Are there practical and kind of concrete ways that you're using it today versus perhaps where you're seeing how it can impact some of the workflows you're working on today or in the future, rather?
Personally, I will put it out there that I am not an AI expert. The deepest I use AI right now, apart from what's built into softwares, is ChatGPT, which I absolutely love it. And I think more people should find ways to integrate and use it in processes. But I strongly believe that companies that are really deep in programming and developing platforms, I think there's huge opportunities for where it will be used in the future. Just as a user, something I love throwing out as an example is like right now we go out and scan a space or we create a model and there's all this data that some expert has to know how to slice up and model and fit stuff. And okay, imagine how you use ChatGPT now where you ask it a question and it reviews information that it studied and it gives you an answer. Well, what if in the future you can just ask your software to analyze your photos and your LiDAR data and tell you information about your building? Just ask it, how many windows do I have? And it calculates and goes through and checks measurements and tells you got this many windows. And then you, instead of having to go look at every single window and figure out dimensions, you ask it, well, what sizes are those windows? Well, now it studies it again and says, well, actually, there's 4 different sizes. There's this kind, this kind, this kind, and this kind. Same way you can keep having a conversation with ChatGPT. I believe there's going to be more softwares that can take this type of data that can have that same type of process. Though I think we're very early on in most companies really integrating it in a useful way. I think we're moving very fast in that field. And I think 5 years will be very different than it is today.
To shift gears on a little bit, community. I think you've done an incredible job of building a community of folks to kind of get folks excited about a certain topic to bring awareness. One challenge is the technical side. Another is the business side. Another is like, how do you build a community in 2024? How do you think about that? I mean, 3D scanning, I think till very recently wasn't sexy at all. And it seems like now folks are really getting excited about this. How do you think about that?
To me, I think community is critical. There is the technical side, there is the business side. I think, like you said, before scanning wasn't all that exciting to a lot of people. The more that the value is being proven of the technology, the more interest there is in it grow. We're at that point with all of these tools that they're becoming desired by the people that are spending the money. The owners, the asset owners, they're building these programs that require these technologies. Well, now everybody's starting to want a piece of that, right? Like I see the value in this. I want to get involved. What can I do? How can I get into it? So I think that the thought around the technologies is changing, but back to community, the thing I love about community again is the shared lessons learned, the networking opportunity. Nobody should try to be the expert at everything. You should have something you're really good at. Well, if you're in a community that has other people that are really good at something else, now you have people to collaborate with, point to. So I think community is a big part of the future in being able to, again, if we go back to there's not enough people to perform all this work, well, we could do it through collaboration, through sharing resources, through educating each other. So I love community for some of those reasons.
Do you find that there's some sort of macro force or perhaps tailwind that's driving the adoption of capture? You mentioned, of course, construction, but that in and of itself is nothing new. Besides LiDAR perhaps getting cheaper these days, have you found in your work that there's kind of other tailwinds driving this adoption?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I don't know if there's anything else that comes to mind apart from, I think, just that growth in seeing the technology work and seeing it solve problems. I think that the industry's just been starting to do it enough and grow with it enough and see the value enough that is changing. 10 years ago, when I started in scanning, you could search the internet all you want. There was almost zero requests for laser scanning. It was companies that knew the value, they were going to use it for their own use case, right? An architect was like, hey, I learned about scanning. I don't want to go out with tape measures, so could you scan this building? Well, over the last several years, that started changing more and more, where a hospital, when they go through a renovation, they demand that the process is, laser scanning, create your model, then go into design. So now that owner, that project is requiring it, where 10 years ago it wasn't. And you see that with airports, you see that with warehouses. You're starting to see demand for the service, where before it was kind of like a added benefit, a cherry on top, a nice visual thing. It's changing to, it has to go that direction. Part of it, I think, is also just design, right? The growth of BIM becoming so standard for design projects. Well, who wants to use old, outdated, inaccurate 2D drawings when you're trying to have a whole team design in 3D? It makes way more sense to go out and scan a building and start with a 3D accurate as built. So I think there's a few factors like that.
A few rapid fire questions. Do you think we'll ever get to a place where legislation or regulation is going to drive some of this? I look at countries like the UK, specifically in London, where it just seems like decades ahead when it comes to reality capture, BIM.
Yep.
How likely is it that we're going to see it here, just based off your kind of front row view?
I think it's very likely in certain scenarios. I am not an expert when it comes to law and legislator, things like that how it gets in there and how long it takes. But I believe, my initial feeling is that I believe it will, because if it is safer and it's cheaper and it's better documentation, there's so many benefits to doing it. And all these asset owners are starting to push for it and require it. Like, at some point, similar to an engineering degree and a land surveying license and, standard ways for delivering drawings to a county, like, I believe that some of these technologies will fall within a process that become a requirement, that become a standard way that it has to be delivered. I think we'll get there for sure.
Another question. There's no playbook as to how to do this. We're all just trying to figure this out between the technical challenges of the built environment, running a business. Who might stand out to you as someone that you look up to, either as a mentor or someone who I say, like, I'm really inspired. I want to build a company and network like this?
I keep saying it's a good question. I say that a lot. Interesting. You have good questions. I actually see those as different answers for, like, the thought behind the technology and inspiration of building that versus the community piece and the media and the things that we're doing on that side. When I really started getting excited about the scanning and the digital tools, I actually can't say there was anybody that was inspiring me. So much of my passion in these tools came from me hands-on getting into it. Like, again, when I first learned about laser scanning, it was not that I saw some other companies doing it and thought it looked really cool and looked up to them and wanted to learn from them. We had a salesman demo us a scanner, and it got put in my hands, and I was just playing with it. Like, it took a couple years really until I started, like, going to an event and finding someone else who was doing it and collaborating or found it. It was a slow process. So most of the interest in the technologies itself came from just doing. And the more that I went out and tried something new, and yes, many failures along the way and struggles and challenges and late nights and sleeping at the office. And, like, there's been so many things that I've just tried for the first time myself that I didn't know anyone doing. I wouldn't say there were a lot of people that I looked up to in the technical aspect. The community aspect, very different. The conference, the podcast, the media piece, that also was very much outside of our industry. I was following other people on social media, Gary Vaynerchuk and Grant Cardone and all these other people from different industries, and looking at how they were building communities around the types of things they were doing, the success that brought in of inspiring people, educating people, building awareness. It was some of those outside of our industry that inspired me to start RCN and start trying to build this community within the built environment, because I didn't see that really happening. To use the word influencer, you see that in so many other industries, right? Well, who are the influencers within construction, within the built environment, within reality capture and digital tools and digital twins? And I don't like what most people think about the term influencer, right? And what that means. But I do like and believe in the impact that it can have. If I can use my skill set in networking and media and building videos and to converse with other experts and hear what they're doing and hear about their struggles and hear about their successes and discuss these different tools and share that with a community, the power that that can do for furthering our industry, inspiring the next generation to want a job in construction, where every trade, construction, survey, engineer, everybody is talking about the lack of resources, the lack of young talent entering the workforce, okay, how can we change that? That is why I believe so much of digging into the technology and also starting to really try to figure out how to push awareness and inspire people in. That's what I'm excited about.
And I think you've done an incredible job. Honestly, I think what you've done and what you are doing to facilitate these conversations just needs to be done. Right. And I think to your credit, you mentioned kind of looking at folks from other industries. And the irony, of course, is like you are kind of being that kind of mentor or person to look up to for folks also needing to bring that awareness. I guess on that note, question for you is that if you had to look back to your 2009 self, just getting started, just playing around with these like new lasers, it's been about 15 years. I have to imagine you've learned a thing or two about like probably what, something you thought was true then is probably no longer true. What would you tell your younger self in 2009?
That's good. That's funny. I love asking people that question, but I don't get asked it very often.
Oh,
I'm like, wait, now I have to think of my answer. Look, if I was to go back to when I very first got into it, to be honest, there's not a lot that I would change because I took that path. I went all in on these technologies. What I would probably do is tell myself this is a good option. Like, forget other things that you might want to do and go all in on these tools and technologies. I definitely, on the media side, I'd go back and tell myself, get on LinkedIn earlier. Get more consistent with educating and sharing and building because of the power I believe that can have. And that's so much of what I do now. I definitely would go back and tell myself to start that earlier. The other thing, though, with like the technologies, I'm even trying to think of this now. The technologies have changed so much over, in like 3-year increments from when I started to where it is now. There's not probably a lot I can think to suggest differently there because what I was focused on was where the technology was at that time. The scanners were big. They were slow. They were expensive. There was no automated registration. There was no LiDAR on your iPhone. It was like big, slow, figure it out. But that's what built the foundation that as things got faster, as things got cheaper, we could do different things. So to be honest, I think it would be reaffirming to myself of like, this is a good path. Don't be afraid of technology. Go try new things. And even the failures I've had along the way, I think are what gave me the experience I have now of being able to tell somebody else, right? Like, hey, don't do this because this is the result. Why do I know that? Because I went through it. I'm kind of a big believer in like everything happens for a reason. I wouldn't go back and fix all my failures. I think I enjoy that I've learned from them and can kind of share that with other people. Even in the side of like entrepreneurship, I think that I would start sooner. And not that that's for everybody. I think that's a whole nother conversation of like, not everybody should be an entrepreneur. But I think that when you're really excited about something, when you're really passionate about a technology, a tool, a way of doing things, you have to also trust yourself in what you want to do, go all in on it. So I think just really encouraging some of those traits.
Yeah. Matt, this was really fun. I'd keep you here for another hour or so, but I know you've got other things to do here on a Friday. But for the folks that want to follow your work, where's the best place they can follow you?
I appreciate it. And again, thanks for the conversation. It has been fun. Honestly, I live on LinkedIn. If people are in this industry and aren't, I really suggest you do. I will attribute LinkedIn to 70% of all business that I've ever built. The power of building relationships, staying in touch with people, sharing your work is massive. So I would connect on LinkedIn, reach out. My whole goal with RCN is providing a platform and a place for other people to be highlighted, whether it be podcasts coming out to our conference. My goal is helping other people become successful with the technologies and the tools that I love. And RCN is kind of the way I can boost them. So,
and you've been doing an incredible job. I owe you a visit to Boise, so I can't wait to maybe for the next RCN come find you And yeah, continue.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, would love to have you. So thanks again for the invite here. I'm sure it won't be the last time we talk.